The luxury hall gleamed under soft golden lights, the kind that made every crystal chandelier sparkle as if it held tiny suns within. Guests moved with elegance, their laughter floating through the air in waves that seemed rehearsed, polished, effortless. The clinking of glasses, quiet murmurs of conversation, and the occasional sharp sound of heels against marble floors created a rhythm that hummed with wealth, privilege, and celebration. Amidst all this, she moved in silence, a young waitress carrying trays stacked with delicate canapes and sparkling drinks. Her uniform was neat but plain, blending her into the background, almost invisible to the eyes of the very people she served. She had been working at events like this for years. Every shift felt like stepping into a world she was not meant to belong to, where luxury dripped from every corner, and the guests' smiles often felt like masks hiding subtle judgment. People talked about fashion, art, vacations to exotic places, and the latest social gossip, as if the small struggles of ordinary life did not exist. She had learned to navigate it all quietly, moving with purpose, yet never attracting attention. She knew the art of invisibility. It kept her safe. It kept her unnoticed, as she carried a tray through the hall. She caught glimpses of the grand piano resting near one side of the room. Its polished black surface reflected the lights like liquid glass. She paused for a fraction of a second, almost instinctively feeling a pull she could not explain. She had not touched a piano in years, but the memory of the keys under her fingers stirred something deep inside her. Her hands twitched slightly as if they remembered movements she had thought were long forgotten. She shook her head gently, trying to shake off the sudden distraction. There was no time for longing here. She had work to do. Guests barely noticed her as she passed. A woman in a sparkling gown waved dismissively at the tray in her hand. A man in a tailored suit barely glanced up, muttering a polite thank you as he took a drink. None of them had any idea who she was, what she could do, or what she had left behind in her life. They were entirely consumed by their own world, and she existed only in the small space between their attention and the polished floors. It had always been this way. Growing up, she had been drawn to music, drawn to the piano in particular. Her parents had struggled to make ends meet, and the old upright piano in the corner of their small living room had been a luxury they had scraped together to afford. She remembered the late nights when the house was silent, the way her fingers would glide across the keys, coaxing out melodies that seemed to float in the air around her. Music had been her escape, her secret companion, her way of speaking when words failed. But life had a way of pressing down on dreams. Responsibilities came early. Bills, part-time jobs, the need to contribute to her family's survival, one by one. Her chances to pursue music professionally had slipped away, and now, years later, here she was, moving silently among people who could not see her, carrying trays instead of carrying her dreams into the world. She had learned to hide herself, to accept the role the world had handed her. But there was a small flame inside her, quiet but persistent, that refused to go out. Every time she passed the piano at events like this, her pulse quickened. The black surface seemed to call to her, whispering memories of a different life. A life where she could create, enchant, and be seen for who she truly was. As the night progressed, the hall buzzed with energy. Waiters and waitresses moved in choreographed patterns, gliding through the maze of guests without disturbing them. She kept her steps light, careful, almost invisible, feeling the weight of her tray balanced perfectly in her hands. Each movement was precise, learned from years of experience, but it was more than skill, it was survival. The luxury of the guests' world could be overwhelming, and she had learned to navigate it without drawing attention to herself. A group of older guests, clearly regulars at such events, lingered near the piano. They were discussing a renowned musician who was supposed to perform later, their voices dripping with expectation and mild criticism. They laughed lightly, sharing opinions about who could play better, who had the most refined technique, who deserved the attention of such an exclusive gathering. She listened quietly from a distance, her heart tightening with a mixture of longing and frustration. They spoke as if mastery and talent were the domain of the privileged, as if someone like her could never even imagine being part of that world. She moved closer to another table, offering canapes and drinks, her smile polite and practiced. She caught fragments of conversations, complaints about service, compliments about the decor, stories of extravagant vacations. Each word reminded her of the life that existed just out of reach, a life that seemed to belong to everyone else but her. Yet, beneath it all, there was a deep undercurrent of determination. She had not completely given up on herself. She had not forgotten the power she felt when her fingers touched the keys, the sense of being alive, fully alive, that only music had ever given her. As she returned to the side of the hall near the piano, she noticed a few guests glancing at her briefly, perhaps out of curiosity, or maybe just by accident. Their eyes lingered for a moment longer than expected, and for a fraction of a second, she felt exposed. As if someone had seen through the invisible cloak she wore so carefully. She adjusted her posture, straightening her back, and moved on, letting the moment pass. She had learned to survive these glances. They did not matter. They could not define her. Her attention, however, could not stay away from the piano. She found herself stealing glances whenever she could, imagining the feel of the keys beneath her fingers, the sound of notes filling the room and capturing the attention of everyone present. She pictured herself performing, and for a brief moment, she was not invisible. She was standing in the center of the room, and all eyes were on her, listening, captivated, moved. The thought made her chest tighten with longing, but she pushed it down. There was work to be done. The night was not about her. Even as she served, she observed the pianist's empty seat. Noticing the small details, the sheet music resting neatly on the stand, the polished surface reflecting the chandeliers above, the tiny scratches that hinted at years of use. Every detail seemed to speak to her, as if the piano itself was aware of her presence and waiting. She felt a strange mixture of reverence and anticipation, though she dared not acknowledge it aloud, not even to herself. Time passed, measured in polite smiles, careful steps, and the clinking of glasses. The guests began to settle into their conversations, their laughter growing louder, their movements more relaxed as the evening progressed. The energy in the room shifted subtly, a quiet hum of expectation lingering in the air. She noticed it too, the way people glanced occasionally toward the piano, the way their voices would soften when discussing the upcoming performance. There was a shared anticipation she could feel, a tension that vibrated through the air, and for a moment, she imagined what it would be like if she were the one to sit at the piano and release that tension. If she were the one to fill the room with music that stopped people in their tracks. She shook her head, chastising herself for indulging in daydreams. She was a waitress, nothing more. She had learned to accept that role, to carry trays with grace, to move unnoticed. Yet, despite herself, the pull toward the piano was undeniable. It was a small flame that refused to die, flickering quietly in the background of her mind, reminding her that she was more than the uniform she wore, more than the role she played in these grand events. A sudden clatter at the far end of the hall drew her attention. A tray had been dropped, and a few glasses shattered. Guests murmured in disapproval, some shaking their heads. She instinctively moved toward the commotion, helping to clean up, calming the guests with a practiced smile and polite words. It was the same instinct that had carried her through countless events like this. It's the same instinct that kept her in the background, indispensable yet unnoticed. She worked quickly, efficiently, without drawing attention to herself, her hands moving with practiced precision. Once the mess was cleared, she returned to her path near the piano, her mind still partially on the keys she had not touched in years. She paused again, feeling a pang of longing that she could not ignore. She imagined pressing the keys, the sound resonating through the hall, capturing the attention of every guest, telling a story that words could never express. Her fingers itched to move, to create, to be heard. She took a deep breath, letting it out slowly, reminding herself to stay in her place. The world of luxury, wealth, and privilege was not hers to command. Yet the piano waited, silent, patient, as if it understood that one day, perhaps, she would return to it. The night continued, each moment a careful dance between service and observation. She moved through the crowd, unnoticed, yet fully aware of every detail, the expressions on the guests' faces, the subtle changes in mood, the small interactions that revealed so much about who they were. She learned to read the room, to anticipate needs before they were spoken, a skill honed by years of experience. And yet, through it all, her mind returned again and again to the piano, to the music that lived in her fingers and her heart, waiting for a chance to emerge. As the first part of the evening drew to a close, she found herself in a quiet corner of the hall, her tray empty, her body moving on autopilot while her mind wandered. She watched the piano, imagining the notes flowing from her fingertips, imagining the room falling silent, imagining the moment when the invisible waitress would be seen. It was a dangerous dream, one that could not exist in the reality of her life. And yet for the first time in years she felt something stir within her, a small, trembling hope, fragile yet insistent, that perhaps, just perhaps, the world was about to see her differently than it ever had before. And so, she continued to move through the hall, carrying trays, serving guests. Blending eyes, she moved through the grand hall, carrying trays with practiced ease. But her mind drifted back to earlier years, to the quiet, small moments that had shaped her love for music. She remembered a tiny apartment, the worn piano sitting in the corner, and the nights when the world outside was silent, leaving only her and the keys. Her fingers had danced over them then, coaxing melodies out of the instrument, feeling as though the music itself understood her when nobody else could. Those were the nights she felt alive, moments when her troubles melted into harmony and rhythm, and she could be free. Even if just for a little while, her family had struggled to make ends meet. Bills were tight, opportunities scarce, and she had grown accustomed to putting dreams aside to help. Yet music had always been a part of her, quietly waiting, like a friend who never abandoned her. She had kept it alive through sheer will, even when life demanded that she focus on work, on survival, on the duties of adulthood that often felt heavy and unrelenting. Those nights of practice, of small triumphs over missed notes and imperfect rhythms, had given her a sense of purpose she could carry into the world outside her tiny apartment in school. She had been quiet, often overlooked, but she had spent hours in the music room when no one else was around. Her teachers had noticed her talent early on, encouraging her to perform at recitals and competitions, but life had other plans. Financial struggles, family responsibilities, and part-time jobs pulled her away from the dream of pursuing music professionally. Still, she carried it with her, tucked into the corners of her life like a precious secret, a light she could turn to whenever the world felt too harsh. Now in the luxury hall, she could see the same piano that had once been the center of her world, a reminder of the path she had walked but had never fully abandoned. She approached it during quiet moments, her fingers itching to touch the smooth black keys, to let the music flow and fill the space around her. It was a forbidden pleasure in this world of wealth and elegance, a moment of daydreaming that she allowed herself only in the briefest seconds between tasks. But even in these small gestures, she felt alive in a way the uniform and trays could never provide. The guests continued their conversations, oblivious to her thoughts. Their discussions of luxury vacations, exclusive memberships, and fine art seemed distant, almost unreal to her. She had learned to move through such spaces without drawing attention, understanding the unspoken rules of invisibility. Yet, as she looked toward the piano, she felt a tug at her heart, a reminder that she had something to offer, something that went beyond service, something that could capture attention and move people in ways they would never expect. She recalled her first piano teacher, a kind woman who had believed in her when few others did. She remembered the hours of practice, the encouragement, and the gentle corrections that shaped her skills. The teacher had told her once, "Music is not just about notes. It's about telling a story, sharing who you are." Those words had stayed with her, guiding her fingers and her heart. They had been a compass during years of doubt, a reminder that talent and passion, even if hidden, were powerful forces. She moved to a quiet corner of the hall, carrying a tray of drinks, but her mind was elsewhere. She imagined the notes she would play, the way melodies could capture the attention of the guests, the way the piano could speak for her when words were insufficient. Each imagined note felt real under her fingers, a bridge between memory and possibility. The world of music, once distant and private, now beckoned, reminding her that her past had not been wasted, that her skill, her passion, and her quiet determination were still very much alive, her thoughts drifted to her own struggles. The challenges of balancing work, family obligations, and her own dreams. Music had been her sanctuary, a place where she could retreat, recharge, and express herself in ways that daily life did not allow. Each performance in her mind, each imagined note, was a reminder that she had persevered, that she had held on to something meaningful despite the world's demands. It was this resilience that gave her courage, even if she did not yet realize the extent of it as she carried out her duties. She observed the audience, noting subtle gestures, expressions, and movements. She understood people, their patterns, and their expectations, a skill honed from years of navigating social spaces as a quiet, unnoticed participant. She saw glimpses of judgment, curiosity, and distraction, but also moments where attention lingered, where people seemed to sense a story waiting to be told. It reminded her that attention, when captured genuinely, could be transformative. The piano continued to call to her, and she could no longer resist the pull. She walked past it occasionally, her fingers brushing the keys lightly when she thought no one was watching. The sound was familiar and comforting, each note resonating deep within her, reminding her of nights spent alone, playing for herself and no one else. In those moments, she felt her true self. The person she had been before life demanded compromise, before invisibility had become a shield. The music was a part of her identity, a thread that had never broken, a testament to her perseverance. She remembered performing in school recitals, the nervous excitement, the applause, and the validation that came from sharing her talent with others. Those memories were bittersweet, tinged with the realization that circumstances had prevented her from pursuing music professionally. Yet, they also reminded her of her ability, of the joy that came from creating something beautiful, of the power to evoke emotion and connect with people through sound. It was a skill she had honed quietly, patiently, and it remained within her, waiting for the right moment. In the hall, she observed the staff and guests, noticing the subtle hierarchy, the unspoken rules of behavior, and the expectations placed upon her as a waitress. She had learned to navigate these spaces with grace, balancing attentiveness with invisibility. Yet, beneath this exterior, the desire to play, to share her music, burned quietly, a reminder that she was more than the role assigned to her. She understood that talent and opportunity often existed separately, but the possibility of bringing them together was thrilling, even terrifying. The piano became a symbol of hope, a bridge between her past and a potential future. She imagined performing, seeing the audience's faces transform, feeling their admiration and surprise. It was a dream she had kept tucked away, a possibility that seemed distant, yet tantalizingly close. The thought of stepping forward, of revealing herself and her talent, filled her with both fear and excitement. She knew that if she seized the moment, the world could see her differently, and more importantly, she could see herself differently. She recalled a particular night from her past, when she had stayed late in the music room, practicing a challenging piece over and over. Her hands had ached, her mind had been exhausted, but the music had become a part of her. She had pushed through mistakes, frustrations, and doubts, emerging with a sense of accomplishment and pride. It was in those moments of struggle and persistence that she had learned the true value of music, not just as performance but as expression, as a way to communicate beyond words. The guests' conversations drifted around her, but she focused on the piano, envisioning the sound filling the hall. Each imagined chord, each rhythm, was a rehearsal in her mind, a way to prepare for the moment when opportunity might present itself. She felt her confidence building, fueled by years of hidden practice, quiet dedication, and the unwavering belief that music was a part of her identity. She knew that when the time came, she could rise to the occasion, even if it meant stepping out of the shadows. Her thoughts wandered to the future, imagining what it would be like if she performed publicly, if she were acknowledged for her talent, if she could inspire others through her music. The possibilities were endless, but they also carried weight. She understood that stepping into the spotlight required courage, risk, and a willingness to face judgment. Yet, the potential reward, the chance to be seen, to share her gift, to transform both herself and her audience was far greater than the fear. As she moved through the hall, she let herself linger near the piano for a moment, brushing her fingers lightly over the keys, feeling the familiar resistance and response. The sound resonated through her, grounding her in the present while connecting her to her past. She closed her eyes briefly, imagining the music flowing freely, the room silent, the audience captivated. The image filled her with determination, quiet resolve that she would not allow fear or circumstance to keep her from pursuing this chance. She returned to her duties, but the music remained in her mind, constant presence, guiding her steps, her posture, her interactions. Each movement, each glance, each smile carried with it a sense of purpose and confidence that she had not possessed before. The piano was no longer just an instrument in the corner of the hall. It was a symbol of her potential, a reminder that her talents, her passion, and her courage could converge in a moment of transformation. The evening continued, the guests immersed in conversation and enjoyment. Yet she carried with her the quiet anticipation of possibility. She knew that life often demanded patience, that opportunities were not always immediate, but the fire within her had been rekindled. The piano awaited, the music within her remained alive, and she understood that the moment she had imagined could arrive at any time. When it did, she would be ready, and the world would finally witness the depth of her talent, the strength of her courage, and the beauty of her music. The evening had settled into a rhythm, with guests laughing and talking, servers moving quietly among them, and the air filled with the faint scent of flowers and fine perfume. She continued her work carrying trays and offering polite smiles, blending into the background as always. But a shift was coming, subtle at first, that no one noticed until it happened. The pianist who was scheduled to play that night had not yet arrived. At first, the event coordinator had brushed it off, thinking the musician would walk in at any moment. Time ticked by, and the anticipation grew. Guests began to glance toward the piano occasionally, whispering to one another. Some exchanged worried looks. It was supposed to be a grand performance, one of the highlights of the evening. The absence of music left a strange tension in the air, a gap that nothing seemed to fill. She noticed the change immediately. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw the empty piano seat, imagining the silence that would soon envelop the room if nothing was done. She knew she could fill that space, but the thought was terrifying. She was only a waitress here, invisible, unnoticed, and uncelebrated. Who would listen to her? Who would even care if she played? But then, almost instinctively, she approached the event coordinator, who was pacing near the stage, looking worried. She hesitated, her hands trembling slightly as she spoke, her voice soft but steady. "I can play the piano," she said, almost as if the words themselves were dangerous. The coordinator froze for a moment, blinking at her in surprise. I mean, if you want me to, I can perform something." The room seemed to shrink around her. The coordinator hesitated, his brow furrowed, unsure if he should take her seriously. A faint smirk appeared on his face, though he quickly tried to hide it. "You here? At this event? Are you a professional pianist?" he asked, doubt dripping from his tone. She shook her head slightly, swallowing the lump in her throat. "No, but I know the pieces," she said quietly. "I can play." He glanced around, clearly uncomfortable. Other staff were moving past, catching fragments of the conversation. A few guests looked up, curious about the sudden murmurs. The coordinator seemed torn between skepticism and the pressing need for someone to fill the silence. Finally, with a reluctant nod, he gestured toward the piano. "All right," he said cautiously, "you can try. But don't embarrass yourself or this event." She felt her stomach tighten. Embarrass herself. The very thought made her chest ache, but the pull of the piano beneath her fingers was stronger than her fear. She walked toward the grand instrument, each step feeling heavier than the last. Guests whispered and turned their heads, some in curiosity, some in amusement. She ignored them all, focusing only on the keys ahead, imagining the feel of them beneath her fingers, remembering every note from long ago. As she sat down on the bench, the world seemed to hold its breath. The coordinator gave a small nod, signaling the beginning, and she took a deep breath. Her fingers hovered over the keys, trembling slightly, feeling the familiar coolness of the piano's surface. She closed her eyes for a moment, recalling the music that had lived inside her for years. The melodies that had kept her company during lonely nights. The rhythms that had whispered hope when life had felt harsh and unforgiving. Her first notes were tentative, small, almost uncertain. But as she continued, something shifted. Her fingers found their rhythm, flowing naturally over the keys. The music began to fill the room, soft at first. Gentle enough not to shock anyone, yet unmistakably beautiful. Conversation stopped. Laughter faded. Guests turned in their chairs, eyes widening as the sound enveloped them. It was as if the music had a voice of its own, speaking to everyone in the room, drawing attention without demanding it. She felt a wave of fear and exhilaration wash over her. Every doubt, every sneer she had imagined from the guests melted away with each note. She was no longer invisible. The room had shifted, the energy changing as people listened, caught off guard by the depth and emotion coming from someone they had barely noticed just moments before. She poured herself into the music, letting it tell her story. Letting it speak the words she could not say aloud. Some guests exchanged glances, clearly shocked. Whispers spread through the crowd. Who is she? How can someone like her play so beautifully? Their judgmental eyes, once dismissive, now widened in surprise and curiosity. Even the coordinator who had doubted her stopped pacing and leaned forward slightly, clearly captivated. The sound was more than skill. It carried a weight of emotion, a history of struggle, and the quiet triumph of a person who had kept her passion alive despite the odds. She moved through the pieces she knew best, each one bringing a different emotion, a different story. Some were soft and gentle, coaxing the room into calm reflection. Others were faster, stronger, demanding attention, asserting her presence with every note. The guests shifted in their seats, captivated, leaning in, forgetting their drinks, their gossip, the world outside the hall. For a brief moment, there was only the music and the person playing it, and it held them spellbound. Her heart pounded, but her fingers moved with a certainty that surprised even her. She had not realized how much she had missed this, how deeply music had been a part of her, a thread woven into her very being. Each note was a release, a reclaiming of herself. The room no longer saw a waitress, they saw a musician, a storyteller, someone who could touch their emotions with the power of sound. And with that recognition came a strange, exhilarating sense of freedom. As she continued, she noticed subtle reactions from the guests. A woman in a sparkling dress had tears in her eyes, brushing them away discreetly. A man, usually rigid and composed, leaned back, letting a soft smile spread across his face. Some children, usually restless at such events, sat still, mesmerized. Every note, every melody seemed to weave a spell over the room, bridging gaps between people who would never have connected otherwise, despite the beauty of the moment. A small voice of doubt still whispered in her mind. What if she faltered? What if someone laughed? But she ignored it, focusing on the rhythm and flow she had practiced silently for years. The music carried her, guided her, and in return, she guided the room. Every chord resonated with emotion, every pause held meaning. She was speaking a language everyone understood. Even if no words were spoken, she glanced briefly at the audience, noticing their transformation. The same people who had barely acknowledged her presence moments ago were now leaning forward, eyes locked on her hands. Conversations had ceased entirely, replaced by an unspoken unity, a collective awe. She realized that this single act, this one brave step, was changing not just how they saw her, but perhaps how she saw herself. The invisible waitress was becoming visible, recognized, celebrated, even if just for a few minutes. Time seemed to stretch. The music carried her forward, allowing her to explore dynamics and emotions she had kept locked away. She could feel the room responding, the energy shifting with every rise and fall of the melody. The piano became an extension of herself, and in that connection, she discovered a confidence she had not known in years. She was no longer merely performing notes. She was telling a story, sharing a piece of her soul with an audience that had not expected it, as the final notes echoed and faded into silence. The room remained still for a heartbeat longer. Then, gradually, applause began, soft at first, then growing, spreading from one end of the hall to the other. It was not polite. Clapping it was genuine, heartfelt, a recognition of the talent and courage that had just been revealed. She felt a warmth spread through her chest, a mixture of relief, pride, and joy. She had risked stepping out of the shadows, and it had paid off in a way she could never have imagined. The coordinator approached cautiously, his expression shifting from doubt to admiration. He offered a small, genuine smile, shaking his head slightly. I didn't know you could do that," he said, as if speaking the truth was almost difficult to admit. She smiled faintly, still catching her breath, letting the sound of applause wash over her. It was more than recognition, it was validation, a moment of triumph that words could scarcely capture. Guests began approaching, offering compliments, congratulations, and curious questions. Some wanted to know where she had studied. Others asked how long she had been playing. She answered modestly, keeping her tone soft, yet the pride she felt could not be hidden. Every interaction reinforced the fact that she had stepped beyond the role she had been given, into something greater, something that belonged entirely to her, as she returned to her place among the staff. Her uniform still plain, her hands no longer shaking, she realized something profound. She had always been more than what others saw, more than the invisible roles she had been forced to occupy. In one moment, in one act of courage, she had reclaimed a part of herself that had been dormant for too long. The piano had been her voice, and the room had listened. It was a lesson she would carry forever, that sometimes all it takes is one step forward, one brave decision. To show the world who you truly are, the notes lingered in the air, a soft echo that made the room feel alive, like it had taken a deep breath and held it, waiting. The guests, who had been skeptical moments before, were now silent, leaning forward in their seats, captivated by the music and the person producing it. She sat at the piano, her hands steady now, her heart beating in rhythm with the melodies flowing beneath her fingers. Each note she played seemed to reach into the souls of those around her, stirring emotions they hadn't expected to feel. She closed her eyes briefly, letting the music guide her, letting the piano tell the story she could not put into words. Her life, the years of quiet struggle, the hidden nights spent practicing on an old piano, all of it poured into every key. There was pain, yes, but there was also joy, determination, and a quiet pride that came from surviving and holding on to something that mattered deeply to her. The audience felt it, even if they did not know her story. Even if they had once thought of her as invisible. The room seemed to transform. The grand hall, filled with wealth and status, became a place of shared experience, of emotion and humanity. Eyes that had once been distracted were now locked onto her hands, onto the music that seemed to grow stronger with every passing moment. Some guests pressed their hands together lightly in their laps, as if holding themselves still to better feel the sound. Others let themselves sway subtly, carried by the rhythm, caught in the current of emotion she created. It was a delicate balance between technical skill and raw emotion, and she navigated it effortlessly, though in truth she hardly noticed. She was lost in the music, and in that loss, she found freedom. Her fingers moved with grace and confidence, tracing the melodies that had been a part of her for so long. She played with emotion, allowing her feelings to shape the music in ways that no sheet could dictate. The piano became a mirror of her soul, reflecting her hopes, her struggles, and her quiet triumphs. Each chord was deliberate, yet natural, flowing in a way that made it impossible for the audience to look away. It was not just sound, it was storytelling, alive, breathing, and honest. Guests shifted in their seats, completely absorbed. Some leaned forward, resting their elbows lightly on the tables, their eyes wide with disbelief. Others closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them, feeling emotions that were both unfamiliar and familiar at the same time. Laughter and conversation had disappeared entirely, replaced by a reverent silence that spoke louder than any words. She could feel the energy in the room, a tension that was not fear but anticipation, a shared connection that bound everyone together through the music. Her confidence grew with each passing moment. At first, she had been nervous, uncertain if she could meet the expectations of an audience that had barely noticed her mere minutes before. But now, as the music flowed through her and out into the room, she realized that the audience had nothing to fear, and neither did she. The piano was not just an instrument. It was her voice, her declaration that she existed, now that she was more than her job, more than the uniform she wore, more than the invisible figure serving drinks in canapes. She was a musician, a storyteller, human being capable of moving hearts with the power of sound. She transitioned into a faster piece, one that carried a sense of urgency and exhilaration. Her fingers danced across the keys, moving with a speed and precision that seemed almost impossible. The audience responded instinctively, leaning forward, their eyes tracking every movement, their breaths held as if afraid to break the spell. The music soared, filling every corner of the hall, wrapping around the chandeliers, slipping beneath the tables, and sinking deep into the hearts of the listeners. The hall was alive with sound and emotion, and she was at the center, the source of it all. Even the coordinator, who had doubted her moments before, watched with astonishment. His eyes softened, and a genuine smile spread across his face. He had seen musicians before, performers who dazzled with skill, but this was different. It was not just about technique or showmanship. It was about authenticity, about the raw honesty of a person revealing themselves fully to a room of strangers and, in doing so, transforming the space around them. The waitress, the quiet, unnoticed worker, had become the heart of the event. The music shifted again, slowing into a soft, gentle melody that filled the room with warmth. The audience relaxed into it, their bodies easing, their minds quieting, allowing themselves to feel. She felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes as she played, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming realization that she was finally living a moment she had long dreamed of. Every note was a victory, every chord a testament to years of hidden effort and quiet determination. The piano had become her stage, her sanctuary, her moment of truth. She glanced briefly at the audience, seeing faces transformed by the experience. There was admiration, certainly, but more than that, there was recognition, a silent acknowledgement that she had given them something valuable, something real. People who had once ignored her were now leaning in, captivated, their previous assumptions shattered. It was a reminder that talent and heart cannot be hidden forever, that even the quietest voices can be heard if given a chance. As she continued, she let herself improvise, following the music as it led her, allowing each emotion to dictate the flow of her fingers. There was joy, sorrow, tension, release, all intertwined in the narrative she was creating through sound. The guests were not merely observers. They were participants caught in the web of emotion and story that her performance wove. It was intimate, yet grand, personal, yet universal. A delicate balance that she handled naturally, instinctively. With the wisdom of years spent practicing in solitude, she could feel the room breathing with her, responding to her choices, the rise and fall of the melody, the pauses and crescendos that drew them in. It was a living experience, one that transcended the ordinary boundaries of performance. In that moment, the distinction between the waitress and the pianist disappeared entirely. She was fully herself, fully alive, fully seen for the first time in a long time, as the final section approached. She allowed the music to slow, to soften, to carry a sense of closure. Each note lingered, echoing in the hall, resonating in the hearts of those who listened. When she finally lifted her hands from the keys, the room was silent for a heartbeat longer, as if no one dared to break the spell. Then, slowly, applause began to ripple through the crowd. Soft at first, then growing, spreading, building into a wave of sound that filled the hall. It was warm, genuine, and unrestrained. A recognition of something rare and extraordinary. Tears slid down her cheeks as she bowed her head slightly, overcome by the emotion of the moment. She had risked stepping out of her role of leaving the safety of invisibility, and it had paid off in the most remarkable way. The audience had seen her, truly seen her, not as a server or an employee, but as a person, a musician, a storyteller. In that room, in those few minutes, she was no longer invisible. Guests approached her one by one, offering words of admiration, congratulations, and amazement. Some asked where she had learned to play. Others wanted to know how long she had been practicing. She answered modestly, quietly, letting the applause and recognition fill the space where doubt had once lived. She realized that this moment was not just about the performance. It was about reclaiming herself, proving to herself that her passion, her talent, and her heart had worth beyond what she had ever imagined. The coordinator came over once more, this time offering a heartfelt compliment. "That was incredible," he said, his voice sincere. "I never expected. I didn't know you could play like that." She smiled softly, allowing herself a small moment of pride. The applause continued, echoing in her ears, a sound that would stay with her forever. She had taken a step into the unknown and emerged transformed, visible in a world that had once overlooked her. As the guests settled back into their conversations, their expressions still tinged with awe, she returned to her work. But something fundamental had changed. She moved with the same careful grace, but now there was a lightness in her steps, a quiet confidence that came from knowing she had shared a part of herself with the world. She had proven not just to the audience, but to herself, that her voice, her talent, and her story mattered. The piano sat in the corner, silent once more, but the echoes of her performance lingered. She knew that the world would continue around her, that she would return to her work as a waitress, serving drinks and carrying trays. But something within her had shifted irrevocably. She had touched lives, even if only for a brief moment, and in doing so, she had touched herself as well. The night continued, the guests eventually leaving, but the impact of her performance remained. People would speak of the evening for weeks. It's not just because of the grandeur of the event, but because of the unexpected brilliance of the woman who had played the piano when no one expected her to. And she would carry that memory, that sense of accomplishment, forever. It was a reminder that courage, talent, and authenticity cannot remain hidden forever, and that sometimes one brave act can change everything. The applause faded slowly, leaving a warm, vibrating silence in the room. A silence that held respect, wonder, and disbelief. She had sat at the piano only moments ago, pouring herself into music, sharing pieces of her heart and soul. And now the echoes of her performance lingered in the minds and hearts of everyone present. She took a deep breath, letting the moment sink in, feeling both exhaustion and exhilaration. Her hands still tingled from the rapid movement over the keys, and her chest swelled with a pride she had not allowed herself to feel in years. Guests began to approach her cautiously, almost as if stepping into a sacred space. Their expressions had softened. The judgmental air from earlier had been replaced with admiration, curiosity, and something she had almost forgotten, genuine interest. They wanted to know her story, where she had learned to play, how long she had kept this talent hidden. She answered quietly, humbly, letting the words flow naturally. Realizing that tonight was not just about impressing them, it was about reclaiming herself. The coordinator, who had doubted her from the start, came closer with a smile that carried respect and astonishment. He shook his head slowly, muttering under his breath, "I can't believe I almost overlooked this." She simply smiled back, still feeling a little vulnerable but stronger than she had in years. In that moment, she understood something important. Courage was not about being fearless. It was about acting despite the fear. She had acted, and the world had noticed as the evening wound down. She continued her work, carrying trays, offering drinks, and moving among the guests. But everything felt different now. She moved with a quiet confidence that had not been there before. Each smile she received from a guest, each nod of acknowledgement reinforced the feeling that she was no longer invisible. The tiny flame of hope that had lived inside her for years had grown into a small but steady fire, and she carried it proudly, even if only she could see it fully. A few guests lingered longer than others, wanting to talk, wanting to connect. Some offered to introduce her to other musicians, some invited her to perform at other events, and some simply wanted to thank her for the beauty she had shared. She listened to each offer politely, feeling a strange mix of disbelief and excitement. Opportunities she had never imagined were suddenly within reach. All because she had chosen to play despite her fear, despite the uncertainty, despite the years of being overlooked. The piano, now quiet, seemed to watch her as she moved away from it. She glanced back once, feeling a strange mix of gratitude and longing. It had been a companion through lonely nights, a teacher through hard times, and now it had been the vehicle of her triumph. She placed a hand gently on the polished surface, almost as if saying thank you. It had waited patiently, just as she had, for the moment when she could reclaim her voice and show the world her worth. She thought of the guests who had once ignored her, who had dismissed her as just another waitress moving silently among them. Now, they had seen a different side of her, a side that commanded attention, evoked emotion, and inspired admiration. It was a revelation not just for them but for herself. She realized that her talent had always been there, unchanging, waiting for her to have the courage to share it. The world had underestimated her. She had never underestimated herself. As she walked through the hall one last time that evening, she felt a lightness that was new, a freedom that came from being seen for who she truly was. The chatter of guests, the clinking of glasses, and the hum of conversation no longer intimidated her. She understood now that her presence mattered, that her actions could create ripples of change, and that even small steps taken bravely could alter the course of her life. Each glance of acknowledgement from a guest reinforced this understanding, a silent affirmation that she had stepped out of the shadows and into the light. The night ended, guests departing with smiles and words of praise still on their lips. She lingered for a moment, letting the last notes of her music echo in her mind, savoring the memory of the silence, the awe, and the genuine emotion she had witnessed. She realized that this was more than a performance. It was a turning point, a moment where she had proven to herself that her dreams were valid, her talent real, and her courage enough to make a difference. Even as she removed her uniform and prepared to leave, she felt a shift deep inside her. Life had not changed overnight, and she would still face challenges, responsibilities, and the struggles of everyday existence. But she had gained something far more enduring: belief in herself. She had seen the impact of her passion, the power of stepping forward despite fear, and the importance of embracing her talent without apology. The waitress who had once blended into the background was now someone who had been witnessed, acknowledged, and celebrated, even if just for a moment. Walking out of the hall into the cool night air, she felt a sense of peace and purpose. The city lights shimmered around her, but she was no longer just a small figure moving through a large world. She was someone who had made herself visible, who had touched lives with something she loved, who had reclaimed a part of herself that had been hidden for too long. And she knew, without doubt, that this was only the beginning. The fire inside her would continue to burn, guiding her forward, reminding her that courage and talent, when combined with determination, could change the course of her life in ways she had never imagined. The night would become a story she would carry with her forever. A story of stepping into the unknown, of sharing her gifts despite fear, and of discovering the power within herself to transform not only her life, but also the perception of those around her. It was a story of triumph, of resilience, and of the quiet, persistent courage that had carried her from the shadows of invisibility to the light of recognition. She had played, she had been seen, and in doing so, she had changed the course of her life forever.